It's gonna be weird. It's, I guess I can, it's recording me. That's fine. Oh, I know that. All right, I guess y'all all coming, so appreciate you being here. Appreciate you being here. So I stole this from the Keller Williams Land Group. There's gonna be, I think it came out of Texas, so there's some different things in here that were not really relevant to what we talk about, but around here, but I'll talk about that when we get there. It's not too terribly much. I think there's only 8 slides, but most of them will just be general talking. I mean, I'll hit some points along the way, of course. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask along the way. I'll give a little about me, kind of what kind of got me started in this and why I like land, focus on land, kind of my background on that. So I'm from Arkansas, but we lived in Georgia, Mississippi, Arkansas actually twice. Went to college in Missouri. And then, well, we moved here in 04. My dad manages the Clark River National Wildlife Refuge in Benton. And so he's federal. So his job had us moving around a lot, you know, just like the Army, you move, you rank, you know, that's how you get pay raises. And so that is what we did. And his goal was to have us somewhere permanent, hopefully back in Arkansas with our family. There was a refuge in one in particular he wanted to get back to. Never really happened. Obviously, we really did like Western Kentucky, and we basically, you know, it was hard to leave. We didn't really end up in the end, we didn't want to leave. And so we've been here since 04. I moved here in 6th grade. Went to Marshall, graduated in 11. So with Dad's job, had a lot of opportunities along the way to do a lot of conservation, wildlife things related, wood storks, alligators, black bears, migratory songbirds. Just had, you know, a really cool opportunity to do some things there that, you know, most folks don't get to see on the conservation side of things. Sea turtles as well. Really liked it over in Georgia, doing some sea turtle work. If we hadn't left there, I probably would have done something with marine biology. We ended up over here, and can't ever see myself going back now. You know, we did a lot of hunting growing up, big outdoorsman, still travel. That's all I do in my free time when I get a minute. So it all kind of came full circle, you know, being around him and everything wildlife related. His, you know, he's got a master's in wildlife biology from Mississippi State. And so that was kind of all came together. I knew I kind of wanted to do something outdoors, wildlife related. Work for the government's basically your only option in the wildlife field for the most part. So, you know, growing up, we had a lot of, you know, just hunting and whatnot. We never really had our own farm. We never had an opportunity to own, we were never anywhere long enough. Couldn't afford to when you work for the government. You know, there's only, you know, we just never, we had leases, we had permission farms, so we never owned our own piece of dirt. So that was kind of always my goal growing up. I'd look at listings all the time before I even knew, dreaming about having a farm, a place of our own that we could do something we wanted to do without having to ask permission. And so moved here, then it kind of more like the Midwest, kind of became introduced to FFA, agriculture, that whole side of things, more out of the South and into the Midwest. And that really changed a lot for me, kind of got into that and really took a liking to it. So my degree as in ag business, that's what I went to school to do. I played college baseball, and so bounced around a couple schools, went to junior college, and then went to Arkansas, played D2, and then ended up in Missouri at a NAIA school where I finished out, met my wife, and that was some really pretty country up in North Missouri. And so bounced around a lot of places, and I tell my clients all that too, because I've seen a fair amount of the country compared to somebody that's lived here their whole life. And I use that against everybody. It's like I've been a lot of places, and it you know, really is hard to beat Western Kentucky from an outdoorsman aspect, from a fishing aspect, from quality of living, cost of living. You know, when you're talking to a lot of out-of-state buyers, I mean, you know, I can say all those things. And so that I've done it all personally. And so got my degree in ag business, came out of college, was determined that I was going to get a job in the ag field. Well, it's only the sector of ag is only so big in Western Kentucky. It's not like it might be in Iowa Kansas, Missouri. And so after 3 months, I finally hired on at Hudson, selling lawnmowers, small tractors. And in that meantime, that summer, between the time I graduated in May and the time I took that job in August, I was working odds and ends, mowing, I was still living with my parents. Not really sure what I was going to do. And just got a real estate license on a whim. Found the cheapest class I could take. Didn't talk to any agents, didn't talk to any brokers, did my own research. Just thought this sounded fun. Thought I might sell a farm on the side here and there while I worked my real job. And got that license, or did that schooling that summer. I had already made it as far as within 7 days of taking my test before I ever talked to any companies. And so, initially wanted to do land. Well, first, basically, you got Whitetail and you got Mossy Oak. Those are the two big players in that sector. Whitetail had 10 people at the time. Now they've got way more. So I didn't even bother. Didn't even bother. So I called the Mossy Oak guy in Metropolis. He's like, yeah, meet me for dinner. I'm coming through the area. Let's have dinner. He met, told me whatnot, signed up just like that. So I kept that license. Wasn't really doing a lot. Didn't get any training. Didn't get any guidance. He would answer the phone. He was good to me. Have no complaints. But I was the only agent he had in Kentucky. The land game, specifically with other big companies like Land Pros, Whitetail, Mossy Oak. There's the land guys. They traditionally have listings that are more scattered. They can drive, and I talk to a lot of them still today around the country, Midwest, mostly just friends that I've made along the way and people that just, what are you seeing? What do you got? Referrals, this, that, and the other. The difference.
Same Mossy Oak that makes the camos.
Mhm. Yep. And so same company, which actually the other one I left out is now Realtree bought into United Country, or bought them. Basically, it's still a real estate company. They get a royalty from using that name, but people gravitate towards that name because they've heard it for 50 years. They've been in business since 1970, 1980. Even though they just sold camo, now they sell land. So they are making more, those two companies, Realtree and Mossy Oak, from the real estate division now than they most likely are off of any pattern they've ever made, because they get a royalty off of each sale. Mossy Oak gets 8% of every transaction of the royalty fee of every commission. So you think about, they do 100 million volume, 8 million in their pocket for just just to be able to use that name. So kind of went that route. I was working at John Deere there, chained to that desk, absolutely hated it. I worked there from August until February. They laid me off. Was laid off with like 50 other people at the time. It was 2016. And then it was like, well, I think I had one listing. We were not in the MLS. I didn't have any tools. I spent the first 2 or 3 years before I joined Keller Williams out of the MLS. Didn't have anything to work with. It was just me out there doing what I wanted to do, which obviously made things a little bit harder. And the market was not as good as it is now, or has been. So got laid off, and it was kind of like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to go find another job that is something else? Or are you going to stay in this field? So I picked up a job just to make ends meet, not because it was relevant, just because I knew somebody who was leaving that job, and it was working for James North in Calvert City doing land surveying. That's been extremely helpful. I didn't really realize at the time I took the job because I needed a job, and it was relatively flexible. James is still a good friend. I still send most of my recommendations as far as surveys to him. I do work with other surveyors also, but I have a great relationship with him, and learned a lot doing that, about deed research, writing the deeds, plats, all the stuff that entails. I can run the machine, and I'll talk about that more later. Not he tried to get me to go be a land surveyor. It wasn't meant to be. I couldn't handle it. There's too many imperfections in that profession, and they just not when at that time I was kind of snowballing this business to the point that it was like, I've got this here. I would have had to go back to school and done some other things, and I'll talk about what it takes to be a surveyor here in a little while. So that's a little bit about me. Joined Keller Williams. Here it was 18, 19. Been here about 3 years now. I am a licensed broker, and I do have my Tennessee license as well. Just kind of keep those in my pocket in case I run across them. Going back to the other guys in the Midwest who work for these bigger companies, they can very often drive I talked to them, I got the listing 2 hours this way, I got a listing 3 hours this way, and big farm here and big farm there. Well, we obviously can't do that. We're limited by geography. So that really kind of changed my mind on specifically targeting land only. And now as my business has grown and just the people I know, I didn't really feel comfortable doing residential out the gate. Now, half of my business is residential and commercial, and then I still do as much acreage as I can get my hands on. But in Western Kentucky, those big farms just are so much harder to find because we're not on sections and squares, and everything's been busted up and busted up and busted up and busted up. A lot of what I even still get is 50 and 100 acres. Every once in a while I will get a fair size farm, but they are still just hard to come by. When they do come up for sale, there's so many people around here wanting them. A lot of times they don't have to list it. There's a lot of times that just farmers and neighbors, it's all it takes. So I'll kind of get into the nitty gritty of it. This is my most commonly asked question, so I'm glad that they put it as the first slide. People call me all the time, other agents, sellers, whatever you want to say. What's it worth? Obviously, that's relative. It could be anything, we're seeing even $10,000 an acre. I know in Iowa and other places, row crops bringing $15,000, $20,000 an acre. I know a friend of ours in Georgia selling land for $58,000 an acre that they have owned in Atlanta. Caught up to them. Family farm, been there forever, and that's what they sold it for after all the years, and that was last year. So it's obviously what somebody's willing to pay. Most commonly around here, we're still in that in that two to five. That's most common. Now, anything under 50 acres, the price per acre is almost an irrelevant number, because especially under 30, people call and say, because what you're doing there, when you get above 50, you're talking farms, most likely. You're looking at investors, hunters, farmers. Then it becomes a much more easily defined number. If it's under 50 acres, you're most commonly look, then you open it up to a broader category, typically because of price point. You open up to a broader category of buyers, one-time home builders, developers. You've had, there might be two brothers going together and both build houses. I've had that happen. You just open up to a greater pool of buyers. You're not so much focused on what the price per acre is worth. So when you get specifically under 30, the one rule is that if you are selling to a one-time home builder, their dream farm, anything under 30 acres, that is the one person who can afford to overpay for a piece of land, because you're never going to sell it. You're going to build that house. Let's say you buy the 10 acres and you pay $100,000 for it. Well, on a price per acre basis, that's irrelevant. You put a 3,000 square foot house on 10 acres, nobody asks what you paid for the land. Then they say, okay, you have 10 acres, 3,000 square feet, a 2-car detached garage, fencing, a pond. Okay, then you put it all together. So it is much more irrelevant under 30 acres. That is, if there's any opportunity to build, which most commonly around here, that's what those tracts have been chopped up to be. And that is a conversation that I'll have with my sellers a lot of times is, do you have any interest in chopping this up and dividing it? Because you will get more money. And I have an example of that later on down the line of a seller who's had 520 acres in 9 tracts. Her dad bought it that way and pieced it together over the course of 30, 40 years. Well, we could have sold it all as one, but we wouldn't have gotten the same return. So it's taken us almost 18 months to piece all 9 pieces back off one at a time, just as what we could handle, not listing them all, just what we were ready to sell one at a time. And we're still finally getting down to just the last of it. We had the last piece of land under contract, and the house is still for sale. The house in 7, we have not moved it yet. So a lot of hunting grounds going for $2,500, $3,000 an acre.
So by parceling off those 9 sections, you made more money for her. And is that because there's more buyers that are willing to buy smaller pieces than someone who could buy 500 acres?
If I had, it's all about the pool of buyers. So if I had 520 acres and I put it up at 1.5 million, only X amount of people are gonna afford that. She's gonna make over two by chopping it up and selling it for $3,000 and $4,000 an acre, $5,000 an acre. In some cases, by doing it piece by piece, because then it's much more affordable to more buyers. So that's kind of where, as bad as I hate to see that happen, and that's what James always said. He said, like, where I sell my soul is chopping up farms. And he said, I hate it, but that's what I get paid to do. So, and then you have other farms that just don't sell. They sit, they're not as appealing. And when you do that, then you put a new look on it. Of course, at that point, it's all about access. You don't want to sell off one portion and then pigeonhole yourself into another and be stuck with something that's you can't sell except for at a much cheaper price. So you have to very strategically take it apart before before you look at doing something like that. Another tool, and I'll talk about it now instead of later, but I will advertise pieces. I've got one right now specifically south of Eddyville. It's 38 acres. We have it advertised as 26 and 12 because they're two different access points, but it's not been surveyed. It's just advertised that way. Now, it's in the notes that if you purchase this farm, you're gonna have to wait on the survey to be complete, because I don't want the seller to pay for that unnecessarily and have no need if somebody's gonna buy the whole thing. So we did end up selling it as a whole, so that survey was not needed. But we advertised it that way. We had one piece, 12 acres for 65,000. The 26 was at 180. And then we had the whole thing at 225. So you can get a bargain if you buy it all, bargain versus a cheaper price per acre versus marketing it as two pieces. That's a little, taller price per acre. Now, that's not for every seller, but if they are willing to play the game, take the time, do it in that fashion, they could potentially make more money. Planning and zoning, it's not as big of a deal around here. I'm sure, as you know, when you talk to out-of-state buyers, they start asking about permits and zoning and what they can and can't do. And, a lot of times, citizens like, hey, get your plumbing permit, get your electric permit, do whatever you want to do. And they're just mind blown. Obviously, as you get into town, Murray and Paducah are some of the harder ones to deal with for around here, but it's not anything compared to some other places in the country. And so you do have to do that. That's going to, of course, be on the PVA card. You will have, of course, subdivision restrictions and HOA, which you will run into around here. HOA is not extremely common, but you will find them every now and then. Subdivision restrictions are hit and miss around here because some of them were developed so long ago. The restrictions can be pretty vague. And truthfully, let's just say you were in a subdivision with, several $200,000 to $400,000 homes, and somebody brings in a mobile home. Obviously, the deed restrictions are against that. But for that to be changed, those individual owners are going to have to, without an HOA, those individual owners are going to have to sue the person that put that mobile home in there, saying that they are bringing down the property values and hurting their property, and it's against the rules because there's no HOA to enforce it. So many times in subdivisions around here, if somebody's doing something wrong, there's no police. There's nothing you can do. So just how brave are you in reality? Because you could put a mobile home on a deed restriction, but if somebody sues you, you're gonna have to move it. You're gonna lose, but it's gonna take somebody willing to spend the money out of their own pocket and hate you and what you've done that badly to make that have any kind of repercussion. So, I tell my buyers that look like, hey, that do what you want to do. But, that's what it's going to take for something to be changed. And it would have to be viewed as detrimental. And I forget the word there, the fancy word for bringing property values down.
Is it regression?
There's actually some kind of a clause that I found out about a couple of years ago that if the HOA, if there's like a HOA, like where we live, there's not an HOA, but there's subdivision restrictions. If nobody enforces those within so many years, they sunset.
Mhm.
In other words, you can't come in like 20 years later and go, hey, you got to tear that fence down.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And that very well may be true. I've not heard that. I'm not saying it's not. I will say that I do know that if you have a desire to change any one of those restrictions, every owner in that entire subdivision will have to sign off on it. That is, so that's why you don't ever see that happen very often. Most people just let it go because they're not that worried about it, especially around here. So if you don't have an HOA and you do buy are looking to buy, Kentucky's a buyer beware state. So if something goes wrong, somebody does something wrong, you have chickens, you're not supposed to have chickens, you have horses, you're not supposed to have horses. You're pretty well on your own. But so your options there are is to sue, and that's pretty much it. I'll go on to the next one. So typically, we really don't have any kind of due diligence period in the state of Kentucky. As far as contracts go. Most of the time, from what I see, you're doing that homework ahead of time before you put the contract on the property. Typically, the only due diligence period in that situation might be a survey, whether a survey is required or not. And if you're going to require that survey, then there needs to be language in there that says this is contingent on the survey being minimum this amount of acreage within 10% of the intended advertised acreage. Who's going to pay for that? Because without that clause, in a lot of these land contracts, there's no way out. There's no home inspection, there's no termite inspection, there's no easy way to walk away. And so I had a lot in Grand Rivers that been setting for a year. It was priced high. It was right next to Patty's, right next to post office. Sat for quite some time. We had somebody come in with another agent, another company. They had a buyer, they got excited, thought they were going to make, basically make their easy commission. They wrote an all cash, no contingency offer. Well, after the fact, they didn't do all their homework. They didn't ask for a survey before. Well, then once the bank got involved on his proposed business, they needed a survey. So then they asked us, would we be willing to pay for some of the survey? So I had a very nice seller. She said she'd pay for half the survey. So we didn't have to do that, but we did it because it was all cash, no contingencies on the land. But his business proposal, they were needing that as part of it. So we did the survey. Well, then it comes up short on acreage because it hadn't been surveyed. The deed was quite old. Well, then they, oh, well, this is short, and to top it off, it appraised low. So you've got a low appraisal and a low survey. But they wrote a all cash, no contingency offer. And, they put down, I think, $5,000 in earnest on a $90,000 lot. Which around here, earnest is goofy anyway. It can be, most of the time it's $500 or $1,000. It's never a decent amount, but they had something worth losing. And they kept sending me extensions, and they kept sending me extensions, and kept sending me, amendments to reduce the price. And we basically just said, tough luck. You guys put yourself in this corner. You had all the time in the world. It's been sitting. So that agent hurried into that deal and thought they were going to make it nice and easy. Then they had an upset client because it wasn't what it was said to be. But we weren't going to do the survey ahead of time. It wasn't necessary. She was in her 90s. She had it for 40 years. So we didn't do that prior to listing, but he didn't do his homework either. And he thought he was going to make a quick buck on an all cash, no contingency offer. And so prime example of, they backed themselves in their own corner, and we didn't let them out. They ended up paying for it. He overpaid by standards of the appraisal, and the acreage wasn't our fault. They didn't do their homework. So going into the survey, specifically on acreage, I will typically pull the deed and see how that deed is written. Back in the old days, it was rocks, trees, axles in a creek, anything you can think of. From then on, it went to meets and bounds, which we do not commonly see around here. Most commonly, we see poles. You see reference in poles as a unit of measure. I hate poles. It's very vague. It's just I forget how many feet are in a pole, but it's there. So then you go to what's now minutes, degrees, and seconds. And that's on a northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast axis. And that is how deeds are written today. So they didn't start doing those, I think, till 80s or 90s, give or take, when they started using that unit of measurement, at least around here. And so if it's written in degrees, seconds, and minutes, I typically feel pretty comfortable in the actual amount of acres that are physically there. So if you're going into listing it and you look at it and the deed is anything but degrees, minutes, and seconds, if there's trees referenced, if there's creeks referenced, which a lot of times state of Kentucky is center line of the creek, and you will still see that. Same thing goes with any kind of subdivision, ponds, or the river. In the state of Kentucky, you own all the way to the center line of the river, all the way to the bottom. Same thing with the subdivision lake, you own to the middle of that lake, all the way to the bottom. Kind of weird, but that's just the way Kentucky does theirs. So then I look at that deed and determine, does it need a survey potentially? Sometimes, even if the deed is an old deed, let's say, but it's 15 acres and it's fenced. Let's just say it has a fence all the way around it. The lines are not going to change because they're very well defined. If it's wooded with no specific corners or rivers or creeks or fences or roads to define it, if it's completely surrounded by barriers that have been in place for years and years and years, like it's a cattle farm, and even though it's measured in poles or measured way back, it might not be worth the money for a survey, because 9 times out of 10, if you survey it, it's going to get smaller. They don't get bigger, they get smaller. Because surveyors work off of precedent, just like an attorney or a judge. If the surveyor surveyed the land beside it and he says it's this acres and this is this acres, and there's a discrepancy, typically the one that's 30 years newer is going to win. It's going to hold precedent over, because the technology is more advanced than the other one, unless they find something that they feel like is a major flaw. So let's say it's 15 acres and it's all fenced, and you have it surveyed, then it becomes 12, just by unit of measurement, because it's more accurate. But the lines didn't change because there's already fences all the way around it. Well, you didn't accomplish anything. Matter of fact, you lost money potentially as the eyes of the buyer. You're not doing anything wrong by advertising at 15 acres if the PVA has it that way and the deed has it that way. Now, the deed is going to trump all. Deed is the most important over the PVA. And if there's a discrepancy, you need to look at the legal description and see, because I have been guilty of this myself. You get in a hurry, PVA calls it the X, when in reality, the deed description calls it this. And if the deed description calls it this, that is the legal, what they have to stand on. And PVA is not perfect. They do their best. A lot of times you'll see satellite imagery, the maps, the lines do not line up all the time. And so the deed trumps all. So if the deed says X amount of acres, that's what you got. Sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller. But when you're doing your homework there, the deed is going to trump all. It's typically at the very end. And every once in a while, you'll get lucky, and that survey of that acreage, if it was done, they may reference a plat cabinet and a slide in the courthouse. And sometimes I've even seen certain plats recorded with deeds. Like I remember one, couldn't tell you which one, but I pulled the deed, there was no plat. Went to the courthouse and went back one buyer, because it's in the chain. You can read it in there, the prior deed book and page number that it belonged to. And in that deed, I found a plat that was recorded, but it did not get transferred to the next one. So every once in a while you will get lucky, and you won't have to have it, sorry, because if that's been done. So, and my thing of it is, I always recommend to whoever's paying for a survey, they're not cheap, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. Have it recorded at the courthouse. That way grandma doesn't lose it. It doesn't end up, it's just a raw piece of paper. If it gets lost, you paid for it and you can't find it, it does no good. The surveyor may have it on record, especially now that everything's online and on a computer, but they have only so many records, and yes, but you pay for that, and it's just like, okay, I got it surveyed and how many acres it is. 20 years goes by, we can't find it. Where's it at? How many times I've heard that we had it surveyed, we don't know. And then another common problem or thing that I see is people will have it surveyed and they'll have the corners marked, but they physically never go back out there and see them, so they don't know where they are. Surveyor says they're there, they got the piece of paper, they got the survey, but they don't know where they are. And then they don't put any I always, if it's me and it's my property, I go and take T-posts and drive T-posts at every cap and rebar that I can find as points of reference that should be on my plat, because those will be there. Even if you have no fence, if you can find those, and that's much easier to find than a little, 5/8 rebar in the ground where a tree fall on. You got T-posts there, you got something to work with. Another thing that you can do in that survey realm is have the surveyor set stakes online, which means basically if you've got point down there, point down here, and 1,000 feet of woods in the middle, we can sit here and say, well, it's between here and there. And they're not going to do this. It's going to cost you extra. have them set grade stakes, have them set T-posts online, especially if it's a line that's in question, that's not easy to find in the woods or anything like that. Have them set those T-posts online from point A to point B, and then, you might can stand at one, flag it, or have somebody down there. You stand at the next one, and then you might have a much easier time finding that property line than if you just know there's another one about 1,000 feet that way, and you're over here, and it's like, it's somewhere in that way. So that is another thing you can do. It will cost extra, but I see it happen all the time, and it is well worth the money.
Do you ever use Land Glide or Onyx?
I use Onyx.
How accurate have you found that to be?
It's gonna be within 50 feet. It's a great, once you start using it, you can't go back. It's $30 for the,
Right.
do what?
I mean, 50 feet's a lot of.
No, yeah.
Right.
It's a great tool for in the field. It will get you close. But you have to take it with a grain of salt. And there are other apps, Land Glide's one, MapRight's another, and Hunt Stand is another one that's commonly used. Obviously, they're all geared toward hunting. They'd make a fortune if they'd make one geared towards real estate, specifically agents. I probably have paid their bills over the last 2 or 3 years, how many times I've recommended it. And people end up with it. It's just very, very handy. I've got like 3,000 waypoints on mine between all the hunting and places I go and farms I mark and everything else. It's
I use Land Glide. It seems to help sometimes when you might be showing a property, the little dots.
Oh, yeah.
as you're
Oh, yeah.
walking, and you sort of stop and go, okay,
that's
I
exactly.
think it's here, but don't take my word for it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. I have that thing out. A lot of times I'll have my phone and I'll be showing them, or I'll even take my iPad and pull it up bigger, especially if like you're riding around side by side and you got a 300-acre farm and you're like, okay, this is the big one. Here's the aerial, here's where we are. We're looking this away, and everything's over here. So those things are extremely handy. Obviously they're not.
Yeah, I figured you
they're
had more
tools.
experience and you'd know whether or not they were really.
Oh, yeah, that's what's
Pretty accurate or not.
And every county's different. See, they do not get that information from the PVA. They get it third party. Like specifically Livingston, I'm good friends with them. I'm up there a lot. They don't know how they get the information because they do not come to them to get it. So they're buying it from somebody else. So when they know that something's wrong, they can't fix it because they don't come to them directly. So they buy this batch data from someone somewhere, and it may or may not be accurate. And typically it does take, a year or 2 or 3 to change names and to accurately update to like the house that we sold, and the house we live in now. The new one says my name, but the one that I sold still says my name. But it never checks. So like how they, relay that and at what rate, I don't know. But that technology is super, super handy. I don't know how you'd have done it without, it's extremely useful, and I'm on it about every day, all the time. Who owns what, where am I, what's around me? I see a farm get listed. Okay, this farm's listed, it's out here. Okay, well, I know these 2 neighbors. Pick up how many times I've made a commission. This guy owns a property. Hey, this farm just got next door, just got listed. Just want to let you know. Then you're the person that brought it to them when they go to buy it. You're the agent because because they saw the sign, you saw it on the MLS hit first. Couldn't tell you how many times that's happened. I've got one of those under contract right now because I found out about it. First one there called him, said, hey, look, farm next door. And he's like, I gotta have it. I can't let nobody else get it,
That's the reason I was questioning accuracy. We were looking at a house the other day, and I think you were with us, right? It was like, we're looking at a house and the property line went across the roof of the.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Across the roof of the house.
And every county's different because
This
it,
can't be right.
yeah.
Half of this house is on some, if it is right, there's a big problem with that.
And every county's different. So some are more accurate, some PVAs are better, some have more money, some do a better job, others just kind of are there. And so. All right, so I'll go on to the next one. Soil morphology is not really relevant too terribly much here. We will have to have a perk test. Typically, we don't really have very many issues with that around here. I've never personally had one fail. Somebody that couldn't build where they wanted to build, but I've also seen everything you can think of, from chemical tanks as septic tanks to gray water lines in the creek. Seen it all. So that's about the only thing in that realm. You can go down the soil route of types of soils, which only really becomes relevant on tillable acres. Then you might talk to a farmer, they may want to know what's the soil type, but typically they have a good idea anyway, because they're farming close by, and that's why they're interested, and they know on rule of thumb what that may bring on a yield per year. So a lot of that's, don't really get into that much personally, but it does exist. Driveway, I mean, yes, I do have some lots, for example, I've got a subdivision over in Sharp. And 2 of the lots are on George Clark, but you can't access up George Clark because the line of sight is not enough by highway standards. So your driveway is gonna have to come in off of the subdivision road. So you will run into that every now and then. If that's a concern. Part of your buyer due diligence before you ever put that thing under contract. Because I have had, and the unfortunate part, just like houses, land is still selling extremely fast. I had one that are multiple offer situation. They were from Indianapolis. It was the adjoining farm. I knew, same thing. Saw it, called them. Hey, this farm's next door. You want to buy it? Wrote an offer. They never saw it. We put a clause in there, says they have 10 days to come down and see it. Offers were apples and apples, same money. This one had the clause, this one didn't. They went the one without the clause. So it was unfortunate, but that was all they put in there was that they wanted to see it. But that turned them off, because then they would have to have risked. And it's not their fault. They lived, 4, 5, 6 hours away from their farm. But that was it's just like making a no inspection versus inspection. So that's where as part of your due diligence, you can put that in there, but then you risk somebody making a better offer. So that one cost us on that, and then it actually ended up being a bit more between 2 neighbors.
I think your computer is about to die.
Probably right. Here.
So they want to come down and drive around on it.
Yeah, they just wanted to see it. Like, I mean, you're gonna spend $300,000 in that instance. You'd at least like to make sure you know what you're buying. What it looks like. I mean, they knew which property it was, it was next door. They never actually, because they got to walk it. It was not an unreasonable request, but when you have one sitting right next to it that
Yeah,
didn't ask for it, it's like, well,
right.
like this one, no risk here.
Now, the contingency was they had 10 days to look at it, which would have allowed them to back out.
Yep, and it was satisfactory on them just making sure everything looked like it was. And of course, I didn't recommend that, but they wanted. They were professionals. They knew the game, bought many pieces. But they just wanted to lay eyes on it and walk it one time, because it came up so, how it is, it happens so fast. You got to go, got to jump when it comes up, and they lost. So that's the unfortunate side of things. The silver lining in it is that it sold to the other neighbor, not somebody random who, because it's a hunting property, so it's not like somebody else was in there now between the two of them trying to shoot their deer. Now it was at least the other neighbor, so that's the small silver lining in that situation. While this is mostly true on the fencing, I've never actually ran into a situation where one neighbor has held another neighbor liable for it. At least around here, I've had neighbors offer like, hey, if you want to rebuild this fence, we'll split it. My neighbor offered me that on my house, but I don't want the trees gone. I want the privacy. The guy I bought it from let it grow up, and while it would be pretty, I want that barrier. So, that's something that you can run into every now and then. So these numbers are Texas numbers, I believe, even though now they are more accurate than they were when I first did this in 21, because I used this slide, this presentation then. So most commonly, if you're not doing a hunt farm, then your buyers are people that's going to build a house one time, and they're going to most likely overpay. Commercial rates are construction. I just got a quote yesterday. Construction's 9.99 right now.
999. For what?
9.99 on construction loan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's rather unfortunate. But just like same thing goes, if you don't have any kind of protection in buying the land, these are all due diligence stuff you've got to know ahead of time. Can you get internet? I had somebody buy a house one time assuming, it was with another agent. They assumed they could get internet. Guess what? There was no internet.
Yeah.
We had that a couple.
So, utility company, can you get natural gas? Can you get sewer? Very commonly, we don't see those around here unless you're in town. Seems like county water is in 95% of places anymore, so that's pretty handy. As well, the electric, internet's of course hit and miss. Last quote that I had on setting a water meter, and it's been a little bit, was from Crittenden and Livingston. They said it was $1,000 to set the meter for a 1 inch, $750 for a 3/4 inch. You, of course, are responsible for everything from the meter beyond. But they will set it for you, and they'll bore under the road and all that if they needed to. I don't remember what the power is. It's not $7 a foot. You get 1,000 feet free from the power company, and then anything beyond that is on you per foot. I don't think it's 7 though. Couldn't tell you about a temporary pole. I don't have a great reference of pricing there. Soil test, perk test, I don't think they cost quite that much. Septic, of course, can be anywhere from 5 to 15, depending on the size. Gravels, luckily, with all the quarries around here, gravel's pretty cheap. So it may not be quite that much. But those are all things that when you're looking at land with buyers, specifically people that are going to build a house, those are things that, you can take into consideration. And that's a lot of people, I would say I could fill a phone book with names people who want between 5 and 20 acres in Marshall County. Like I could stay busy forever. They just don't exist.
Yeah.
And when they do exist, they're priced to the point that they're going to pay for them. So this is going on to the next one. So you're going to build, you're selling it to those people, you're helping them, whatnot, if that's what they're going to do. Obviously, cash is real nice. We've all seen a lot of that floating around. Doesn't always happen. The financing side of things is always much more difficult with land. A lot of people just assume it's like a house. Well, it's not. They're going to want 20%. The rule of thumb was always this now this is not the same anymore. I don't know about the balloon, but I always used to tell people 20% down, 20 years and 5% interest. That's what it was forever. Not anymore. But you can potentially run into some 10 and 15% downs at some local banks. Most of the time, 20 is kind of the most common number. There are companies that I had one I was asking about, could he finance a lot? And his company wanted 35% down. There are mortgage companies out there that do not want recreational land. I do not want that business. So they put it to the point that that's not an attractive product. So there are, however, companies out there that are geared towards recreational property and or investment, acreage. Most commonly, Rural First and River Valley. They typically, they're tied in with the FSA in some form or fashion. They typically have rates that are the best on straight recreational ground. They are hard to beat in that fashion. They're not the easiest to work with. I'm not saying I like them, but they do have the best rates. Beyond that, my next place number 2 that I would go would be to a local bank. Farmers, Fredonia Valley, even in, I think, I use them to a lot for Farmers in Fredonia. And then that's both Farmers, the one in Salem and Marion, and also one in Princeton, because they're different. So those small local banks, that's more up their alley. And so if you're not going to go with the big ones, that is usually choice number 2. CFSB, something like that. They've been they're kind of middling, like they're not stellar. They'll do it. Their rates are okay. Depends on their situation. Some people have, local loyalty to other banks, but traditionally banks like US and some of the big ones, they don't want any part of that stuff. And they're just going to shoot you rates to scare you off on purpose. And so financing is typically a little bit different. The construction loan to permanent loan, the quote on a permanent loan for a commercial, the construction was $999, and then once it converted to commercial, it was $8.5. That's what I've been quoted $8.5 by 2 different banks this week because I'm looking at doing a project soon. And so that's obviously not very appealing, but that's what we got to work with. So from a financing aspect side of things, it's not traditional You will get a handful of balloons from people who want to keep their cash in their pocket just in case. That is an option. Any acreage is going to be on an arm. Most likely you will run into some fixed rates here and there, but man, they are hard to come by. Only if they offer maybe a certain product. Another form of financing that's not on here is going through the USDA. If you farm in any form or fashion, and you have a Schedule F, especially if you're a younger person. If you are showing that you have 3 years tax return on a Schedule F and you're making money, you can qualify for some really neat, good young farmer loans. Those loans can go out to 40 years at a 2.5% fixed interest rate. And so if if you got cows, you got sheep, you cut hay, you got chickens, you're willing to do that and you want to buy similar land for a growing operation, you can get a heck of a deal through the USDA on that type of financing. Very difficult. USDA is comparable to VA. It's going to be a lot of red tape. It's going to be a lot of not fun. It's going to take a while, but in the end, just like VA, it is worth it if you can make that happen. The USDA is also different in the way that they do not issue pre-approval letters. They won't even talk to you until you have a sales contract in hand. So if you have a buyer that's going to USDA, which I just did this it was last year. They wanted to buy 13 acres. It was 75, 60,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. And they wanted to put sheep on it and goats. They had their operation. They were already cash flowing. The income was there. That worked out because that property had been sitting for a long time and hadn't sold. So they were willing to wait on us. We had to have it surveyed because we were chopping it in two from the bigger piece that it was a part of to get them what they needed at a smaller piece. And then they could go in there. But you have to have plans. How much is fencing going to cost? How are you going to clean it? It's just it's a business plan on top of everything else. But if you're willing to do it, they offer some great products for anybody with a Schedule F. But it is backwards in the way that there's no pre-approval. You take them a sales contract, and that's very hard to get something under contract without a pre-approval letter. So you're I've done it 2 or 3 times, but it is not extremely common. So moving on from financing, I'll go into advertising a little bit, the things that I like to do personally, just from looking at others, studying how to be different, all that sort of good stuff. This is my number one pet peeve. For the love of all things, put an aerial on the land. How many times you see 50 acres and you see a picture of the road, you see a picture of a tree, and you see a picture of a road, and they didn't get their feet muddy, and they went home. The end. And that's like, okay, well then I have to go to Onyx, I have to go to MapRide. Okay, who's the owner? And then I have to do all the homework for them. So in a way to be different in the land avenue, my gosh, get some drone shots. Put a map up the property. You can get pretty crazy with it, and I'll show some of my software later, what MapRide can do. It may not be worth paying for in everyone's situation. I totally understand, but that is out there. And that is my number one and that is truthfully where a lot of deals are people that take pictures. They'll put it up. Yeah, we'll put it up for sale. They didn't advertise it well. They don't know how to price it. Those are, it's not happened recently. When I first got started, there was 2 or 3 individuals that I didn't have the money at the time, but there was a 35-acre tract in Callaway that was listed for $35,000. Called my guy, he bought it. That was all because they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know how to price it, didn't know what to do. A lot of it flooded. They bought it, invested about 5 or 10 grand, sold it on their own, didn't list it with me, to a friend of mine who found out the hard way after he bought it from them and told me about it, that I sold. I was like, oh yeah, I sold them that farm. This is what they paid. And then he's like, so that was kind of always a fun one for him. Flip side of it, he listed it with me 3 years later, sold it for $90,000. So he paid, I don't know, somewhere in the 60s. So he did well, they did well, everybody did well, all because somebody mispriced it in the first place. There have been 4 now. I did several of those in 2016, 2017, 2018. I know this property is a good deal. They're just hard to find now. if there were some couple of clients as I was getting started, if I knew better, I'd just bought it myself, or I'd have had the money, I'd have bought it myself, but I didn't. And so, advertising and finding especially for buyers, if that's something you're looking for, essentially you're looking for agents who don't know what they're doing and they're misadvertising and mispricing or just like whatever, there are deals there. Now, the playing field is leveling out with everything else in life with the internet and how, the market is now more efficient than it was. So that doesn't happen here as often, but it traditionally, specifically in land, has happened that way for a long time, but it just doesn't, it definitely not happening anymore, or not as often anymore. Going into comps, they're tough. They really are. MLS is not your friend when it comes to comp and land. When I have a specific area and a specific property, I start talking to appraisers, PDA, anybody I know, farmers. What can you tell, what do you know about? Because a lot of those properties are not hitting the open market. There are neighbors and there's people standing in line to buy those farms. Especially, the tillable acres, the row crop, these farmers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And they've got backers from no telling where, and it doesn't matter. They're willing to pay it because it might be a once in a lifetime opportunity to buy the farm next door, and expand. No matter what it costs, they're willing to give it. You will see some of it at auction. Auctions are hard comps, even though you can see those prices. Auctions typically, especially on tillable, are one or two people fighting. And so those comps are tough to come by. To me, I very much, it's a feel thing, as bad as it is to say, based off of the county, part of the county, its best use for that property. Comps are hard to find. And so very much it's just a feel thing and it's an opinion thing, talking to people, digging through PVA recent sales. I am doing one right now in West Paducah. There's comps. I called the appraiser. He said 5 to 7. Talked to a guy at PVA. He said 7 to 10. Well, $5,000 an acre is a huge discrepancy in land sales. And West Paducah, depending on how close you are to town, how far you are from music, what the water's like, there's a lot of variation there. And he had an appraisal. This aggravates me. He had an appraisal, but he wouldn't share it with me because he wanted me to come up with something. So he had that number in his mind based off the appraisal the whole time. But when I told him my numbers, which are selling numbers, it wasn't good enough. So we ended up listing it at his numbers anyway. It's like, well, you would have saved me a lot of work if you could have listed for that and been done with this. Like, I'm not scared to take a property and list it high, specifically land. Days on market is going to be higher. It just is. It's just natural. I've got pieces that have been sitting for over a year. I only got one that's sat for over 2 currently. It's way too high. But I'll take it's free advertising. Some agents, specifically on houses, will not list those properties unless they, are priced to sell. I don't really think that that's right. If your seller has the time, willing to roll the dice and see what happens, you're not gonna hurt my feelings. I'll put it up and I'll take any buyer lead I can get from it and move on with it. And if it sells, it sells. Now I will let them know, like, look, this is your price. This is not my price. Especially if I come up with this and they come up with this, like, we'll list it at your price. That's fine. But I'm just telling you, this is not my sale price, and we will wait as long as you want to. And so when I have somebody that says, I want to make absolutely as much money as possible, and I'm not in a huge rush, well, then, a lot of times it will set. It will take some time, and you have to prove it to them that this is what the market is.
You have to be careful about overpricing residential property where you get
Oh, yeah.
like, there's a few people in town that have a reputation of overpricing properties. So if we have a buyer, almost always gonna come in under, because it's, that's their reputation.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is always that.
And it's a fine line because in this market, you want to sell it the first 7 days. If it sits past 7 days, everybody's like, what's wrong?
The last 2 years, it didn't matter what price put on somebody.
And I've got one right now, over in Calvert. We listed it at 350. It's a $300,000 to $325,000 house. But it's still in a good area. There's enough there that I was like, they were content. This was on me. I was like, look, let's go to 350, not 325. I know we can do 325. Let's do 350. We've had 6 showings and no offers. Now we've dropped it to 340, but they're starting to panic. And I'm like, hang on, it's okay. I know we missed the boat on the initial, we didn't get that person. I was super excited, had to have it. That's unfortunate. I hate that. But it's still okay. You're not, you don't have to leave right now. We will drop it. And then once we get to where we need to be, they will come and it will happen. So that is hard. And we're definitely starting to see having to be more and more careful now
Yeah,
than we were. Because, a year ago, it wouldn't have been a
yeah, with that,
thought.
people aren't flopping their checkbooks open like they were.
Yep, and I think we were at 157 square foot before we went. Which I know that was on the upper end, but. You gotta, every situation is just a little bit different. So this is. The piece of property I was talking about earlier that had 9 tracks. This is not something that I put out there for the public. This is something that I created to send to the seller when I was first initially talking through the property with them. And so knowing that she says, okay, I want to make absolutely as much money as possible. These are kind of the way that after looking at it, walking it, going through it, this is some of the things that I noted to send to her. And my essentially ranges of prices, depending on just how strongly she felt about how much money she wanted to get. They all, we've sold everything but this house down here. We've actually cut it out. We had the house plus 125 and it did not sell. So we cut it out, and as soon as we cut it out, the farm sold first day, second day, somebody was waiting on it. Because they knew that we may very well have to have done that. So here's a piece. For example, with this road frontage, it had it, and we could have, this 18-acre build site would most likely be very desirable to people because it's affordable. Most of the people that call me looking for recreational hunting property, or a build site for that matter, want to be under 150. That's the magical number. That's the magical number that they can make a monthly payment on at like a second one, like a vehicle. That is the magic. Now, it may not be as much with interest rates going up, but 150 is always that magical number. And then it seems like for houses, build sites specifically, 50 to 75 is kind of like the window. People are willing to pay that no matter what it is, because then they can still afford to build the house. Every once in a while, you'll run up to 100, 125 on a build site. If it's got a little more acres and they're wanting, maybe they have, they haven't enough money or a little bit more money to build a bigger house. So I see that a lot. So in this situation with this acreage being, or the access to this specific piece being tough, because there was another house right here. In this situation, it ended up going with this track here. This one had the road frontage. This was just a 1 acre lot that he bought at a different point in time. So it was just much simpler to sell that with the big farm. Utilities were on this piece. And then utilities down there. These pieces right here, well, this piece right here went first week. These two went first day. Neighbor bought them. And all they did was chop. I forget, we got 75,000 for this 21. And then they chopped this off and sold this little tillable open spot and basically made most of their money back. I think it was some guy from California, Crystal McCoy listed it. No, she had the buyer. She had the buyer on that. Whereas this piece right here at 350, 5,000 an acre, it had 50 acres of tillable. It sat for almost a year before we finally got 325. And then it appraised under, which I didn't really agree with, but that piece ended up bringing 5,000 an acre, or right under 5,000 an acre, 42, 44, somewhere in that neighborhood. Whereas this one, it's 125 acres. This was not cropped, and a lot of it was wet because this is a creek. They harvested the timber back in the early 2000s, so there's really no value there. So you're looking at somebody that wants to buy it for hunting. So basically we had both of these listed at the same price, even though one was 70 and one was 25, for different reasons. A lot of times looking at maps like this, you can see, I'm trying to find a good one. You can get an idea of the timber quality without ever having to go to the property, because if it's good and dark, where you see these full canopies, of these big mature trees. And typically you can say that that has not been harvested in the last 30 years. If it's small, light green scrub brush, this is kind of in between on this farm because it was cut in the early 2000s. But if it's, the color variation will a lot of times tell you before you ever go out there what kind of timber you should expect. People now are smart enough to know that timber, used to you could buy a farm, cut the timber and pay for the farm. In some instances, that's very hard to do now. Same thing goes with crop. I get a lot of people call and say, hey, I just want to buy a farm where I get some crop income and that pays for the farm for me. Not gonna happen. It might make one of your payments for you, one payment a year, but that's what you're gonna get. A lot of people, that could have been done back in the, even in the 2000s, it was doable. There was I listen to a podcast all the time. It's a land podcast. I get different people. There's a lot of successful guys on there, deer hunters that would buy farms that would pay for themselves with the CRP and the tillable income. There's different varieties of income that would essentially make what they paid per acre almost offset on their yearly payment. You can't do that anymore. Interest rates and prices of land have gone to the point where it's just a slight help. What's I'll say on that? I had a point there I was going to make and I don't remember what it was. So this is that MapRite software, which I can pull that up as well. This is just something that I use. Pay $16 a month. It's a little more than Onyx, a little prettier than what you can get from the PBA. So I will most of the time make a map, which if you guys have any pieces of property that you would like one of these made, don't take long. I can do that for you, pretty easy, and you can include it. Now it will have my name and number on it, but I can't get rid of that. But I can be happy to make you a map if you decide that you have a farm or a piece of ground that's worth it. So this is a subdivision plat. This is the one that I have several of these lots listed. I'm closing on one of them later this afternoon. Most people don't know how to read these. It's not rocket science, but you can typically always see who did the survey because of their stamp. Their signature is going to be down here somewhere. This one is, of course, going to be measured in feet with your northwest, and then I'm just trying to find a different one. There's your northeast, the curve, the radius, all that sort of good stuff, acres, and not all plats are this nice. This one was done in 98, so it's newer, but I do have some plats that are just hand drawn and they're not quite as, which I guess this one is too, but hand drawn plats that are just not this detailed. Most of the time, the subdivision restrictions will be on the plat as well. You can go to the courthouse and typically get a full-size copy for $5, or you can just have them email it to you, which is much handier than having a 4-foot piece of paper to walk around with.
We pulled one last year. Was it 2 years ago?
Maybe.
We pulled one that the subdivision restrictions were restricted to only Caucasian owners.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah,
I had a house in a subdivision that I wanted to make sure I could Airbnb. I've got it under contract now. I went to the courthouse to look for it and it was in plat cabinet 1, slide 1.
The first one ever.
First one in Lyon County. And of course, those restrictions said nothing about commercial, that was 50 years ago. They didn't even dream that would be a thing. So obviously you can't do there, but that one I thought that's the first time I've ever opened that slide.
That's great.
I don't remember if I had anything else tied to this. Oh yeah, I did put this one. So going back to advertising, I typically put this little thing at the bottom. I just keep this template, pop pictures in and out. This is like a lot of times what I'll post on Instagram, because then I don't have to write all that crap and have people mad at me because I didn't say this, and this. So I keep that at the bottom. When I have my drone shots done, I don't do the lines always. I do that in Photoshop. I will do it usually on 3 to 5 of the 35 pictures. I try to use all the pictures. It's hard on land. A lot of times it's just pictures of trees. When I'm taking pictures of the trees, I want the biggest trees. I want the quality. I want people to see that, there's a little timber value here potentially. If there's not, there's not. But if you're out there, that's what one thing you should focus on is at least some pictures, a handful of pictures of the quality of trees.
Reese, can I ask you a question? What if you're selling property for somebody and they have a trail camera and they're like, oh, I got these pictures of these great bucks. Do you take those or do you say, oh, let me put my own camera out there and catch?
I want them to do the work for me.
Okay,
Typically, if I have time to set up a camera, get the pictures and do the things I would normally do on a farm that I would be hunting myself,
mhm,
it's taking too long.
okay.
I don't have, I will, and I will say this, I'm glad you asked. People lose their mind over truck cam pictures. They'll buy a farm based on truck cam pictures.
Yeah,
It's just, they're fast. I mean, I don't get me wrong, I have a zillion cameras. I have cell cameras. I run them all the time. But buyers specifically absolutely love those. So if you can get your hands on anything that they can provide for you without you having to do that legwork, I'd absolutely take it. Of course, I would limit them.
mhm,
I've seen agents once, a couple, it's not so common anymore, but I've seen the same deer on more than one listing over a few counties. He magically made a lot of travel. So I mean, you will run into that. I'm very leery when I see another agent post trail camera pictures. Because gosh, I could really sell some farms if I took my trail camera pictures and put them on some other places myself. But
so if
people,
you see one with an elk on it, you'll know that went to Western.
that's right, or you better be looking for a big fence.
You can recognize the deer.
Yeah.
Like you can say that's Brad or whatever. And he doesn't live there. I
That-
know he lives over here.
Well, that particular picture they kept using.
So the
It
deer
was the same picture. It was the same picture on multiple listings
Oh, okay.
over the course of a year or two.
Picture of Seth.
Oh, I know.
Right
Yeah.
Oh,
in the
yeah.
tree.
It was like that. I've seen that living room before, and it's not in that.
Yeah, no, I get you now.
But I've seen
I
that.
was just, I thought he was like, oh, that, I know that deer. He doesn't. He
But what
doesn't.
made me think of that is because you have a picture here with property that has a lot of wetlands, and so maybe there, you would post a
Yes,
picture
so-
of their hunting blind
so,
there. or-
Yes, so on this listing particularly, you'll see I have a picture of the wood duck box and the boat that's down there, a picture of the duck blind that's down there, and a lot of times I will put, if it's good enough, big, and people want big. There's a big old pile of ducks. If there's a big old deer they got holding, you might have to blur their face out to put it on there, but it is worth doing because that people want they will pay way more for a proven history
Right,
of something versus not knowing. So if at all possible, you can provide any kind of record of harvest, like this particular property. They want to know how many ducks have been killed off of it per year. Well, these owners, they're in their 70s and they haven't hunted it hard in a long time. So I'm shooting from the hip on harvest numbers. I figure this is about 100 bird per year farm. The permanent blind is right there. I think, no, I'm sorry, it's right there. Yeah, that's right there.
If you're a duck, you'd be dead.
No, I'm wrong on both of those accounts. It's right there. See the windows. I knew it was up further to this end. But these are cattails that have overgrown this farm. And I'm sure at one time this was the right place for the permanent blind. On this piece of property, there's a wetland. Oh, that's another thing I talk about. This has a nature conservancy easement on it. It's like a very restrictive subdivision / HOA. The Nature Conservancy easement was put into place prior to them buying this property. The restrictions on this are 14 pages long. They are recorded in the deed. No agricultural practices, no chemicals, no dozer work, no logging. Basically, its intent is that this property will be for wildlife and kept in its current state forever. Therefore, the value of this property is reduced significantly because you can't do anything with it essentially but hunt it. So Nature Conservancy is a big entity in the state of Kentucky. We see a fair amount of those properties around here. It's not as big as the WRP and CRP programs. That is crop reserve program and wetland reserve program. Wetland reserve program are most commonly either 100-year or perpetuity, aka forever, with the run of the land. Now, wetland reserve is paying I don't know what they're at now, but at last count, they were at $5,800 an acre in, I don't know if it's Livingston or Marshall. Basically, you buy property that qualifies for wetland reserve. They have a ranking system and X amount of dollars per year. And used to, you could buy it and then apply that. Now you have to own it for 3 years before you can apply. But what happens is people buy it, you get paid $5,800 an acre. You only paid $3,000 an acre for the farm. You just made your money. But there's a lot of people doing that, but then they could hunt it forever. However, they cannot change it essentially. It is what it is. This piece of property here is limited to 2 food plots and 1 permanent duck blind. It's in the rules. The duck blind can be no more than 800 square feet. I mean, everything is talked about in those restrictions.
The duck blind, speaking for a woman, if I had a solar panel on top and a RV toilet on it, would that constitute a permanent residence?
I don't know, probably. There's still people. I mean, there's a contact there. I have a contact that I have to call to ask. And you know, they typically do a check once per year to make sure you're still within regulation. And they will fine you if you're not in regulation. Same thing goes with CRP program. I'll talk about that in just a second. And WRP, you do anything against rules, you get a fine. And so these people right here who own this, they got fined once because they put in a water control structure, which was against the rules. And they had to take it out at that. So on that easement, that essentially this is set up to be, you know, hunting forever. That's really what it's used to be. You can put temporary structures like a camper on there. You can have a camper on the property, but it just cannot be set up in a permanent, or, you know, that's where the definition of permanent. I don't think you could put in a septic tank, or I'm assuming you could probably run electric from water, but I don't know beyond that. But everything, you're always gonna have Big Brother looking over your shoulder. WRP and CRP, WRP is way more restrictive. It's because it's meant to be forever and it's meant to be much more, but it also pays more. So CRP, crop reserve program, you see a lot of that around here. A lot of it's coming out because they allow X amount of dollars in the farm bill per year for CRP. To qualify for CRP, you have to have a 3-year crop history on the property. So a lot of people will buy a farm, clean it up if it's grown up, have a farmer plant it for 3 years, then put it in CRP. CRP is typically a little better for hunting, and there's a variety of CRP types, including just fescue, regular old, cut it for hay, pasture, and then you can do other things like native warm season grasses, which include little blue stem, big blue stem, switchgrass, all that sort of good stuff, which is more better for wildlife, costs a little more, it's a little more intensive to take care of. In the CRP program, you have to once a year either spray, mow, or burn. Burning is by far the most friendly to the land, does more for it, new growth, kills trees most commonly, which is, you know, what you don't want, because essentially the government's paying you not to crop that because they have enough crops, but they don't want it to grow up in case they need it. They don't want to grow back to big timber and then have to doze it again and then create that erosion again and put that dirt in the creek, which is going to fill and go down the lake. They want you just to hold it. But you're paying a subsidy essentially for you not to crop it. As the CRP program goes and has less money, landowners are giving it to these farmers. And they're taking it, you know, they're going to get some income off their acreage. One thing I did not talk about was price per acre on cash rent. A lot of times you can do basically, you can do cash rent or sharecropping. And basically cash rent's pretty straight up. They give you $125 an acre. The going rate in Marshall and Livingston area for sure is $100 an acre. You can see up to 200 for some really high dollar ground, but most of the time it's between 100 and 150. That 125 is very common. You will see 200, 250 up when you get in Union County, up in the Ohio River bottoms. Some of that ground will bring more on a per acre basis with cash rent. You will make more as a landowner on sharecropping some years, and other years you make less. A lot of people just like that steady payment. They know what it's going to be.
You're saying the 100, 150, 200, you call it cash rent?
Cash rent per acre.
So
So
that's what a farmer would like, just rent the land.
yeah, so we're renting it from you. I'm going to pay you $100 an acre times 10 acres. You give you $1,000 once a year.
Okay.
And then that whatever they make good or bad if they can make more profit off of it, your rent doesn't change. It stays the same. Now, if you were to shop it around or hard, just like renting a house, you can play that game if you want to. And I'm sure it would go up if commodity prices went up. But, on a share crop basis, it's gonna be a percentage. And sometimes you get more, sometimes you get less. So, that's kind of what you see a lot on prices there. Hunting leases, typically are $15 to $20 an acre. So looking at, that's it. Now, you will see them up to 30. I will not pay $30 an acre personally for a property. That is insane. $15 to $20 per acre for hunting lease is pretty common. And that is another thing that, you should take into consideration before listing a piece of property. Is it hunting season? Are there leases on it? Will people be out there? Because, you could run into somebody. Most people don't like me when they see me out there because I'm selling the farm that they're hunting on. And they're leasing it to hunt on, and now they're losing it because they're selling it. Most leases commonly, in the contract will, cease on the day of closing. Farming is a little different. And before listing, just like with hunting, that may be another person. It'd be like reaching out to a tenant, like, hey, I'm gonna show it's there, you hunting, farming's a little bit different because let's say you list a piece of property like the one I'm about to do in West Paducah. They're fixing to crop it. Well, now that farmer has a crop out there and that crop's expensive. If we're gonna close before then, who gets the proceeds? Does the new buyer or does the seller? If it's $10,000 because it's a good farm, that seller may not want to lose that money, but the buyer can't do anything with it until that crop's gone. Now, if they're gonna farm it, that's one thing. But for example, I sold 6 acres right there next to Turner Land Title in Benton to TriStar. He had his own agent. That piece of ground there had corn that was not going to be ready until October. It was September. The buyer didn't want to wait on that corn because he didn't want to pay another month's rent, and he had contractors ready to start. We had 6 acres of corn standing there that we didn't. What are we going to do with it? Called the farmer. He was a jerk. Called him. Said, I can cut it for silage, which is not as good as production. But I'm still they're going to charge me a docking fee because it's wet at the granary at the bins, and so it's going to cost me money. He said, I'll do it, but I need additional funds as if I could have what I would have made if I harvested in October. So I came out of pocket. The other agent came out of pocket. The seller came out of pocket. The buyer came out of pocket. We lost like $4,000 right there to make that farmer happy so he would get that crop out of there prior to closing. So not fun. That was like to never happen because the corn wasn't ready.
We had a similar house in New Concord that a farmer was farming half an acre of the property we were selling. And he didn't even have a lease or cash rent or nothing. He just decided, I think this is where I'm gonna plant. And so.
Cutting.
Well, and this one, my seller, the farmer, the guy next door had 10 acres. He had 6. He said he wouldn't farm the 10 unless he could get that, because then it was worth it all of a sudden. So the guy was like, I don't care, yeah, do it. Well, then it became a problem. He didn't have anything in writing. He didn't have anything put together. It just became now he's just like similar to a mechanic's lien. He's now got that on that land, and that's his crop, and you got to figure out a plan. And when, if, and how is that going to come about? So whether it's a hunting lease or a row crop lease, that is something that you're going to need to take into essentially consideration along the way as far as value and who that's going to belong to.
So we had these buyers, they just had to. They were really super nice. They were like, well, he can leave the crops until he harvests it, but then we don't want him planting again next year. So we said, well, so all they did was they just made like a little pinky promise and they didn't farm their land anymore. We're like, well, you're taking a kind of a risk, if you don't build a fence or put up some concrete barriers or something.
Yeah. The one on that corner there.
Very corner.
So I can talk as long as y'all want. I'm pretty much kind of went through the things that I felt like I wanted to go through. Just show you some different things. This is the MapRight software that I pay for and use. It's got a variety of different things. You can spend all day doing whatever. Most commonly, I will click and get the acreage, create the parcel outline. It will give me all the same information a lot of the Onyx will get. And then the FEMA floodplain is another easy to use tool because buyers don't freak out, they freak out over floodplain, whether there's a little bit on it or a lot, or whether it may or may not ever happen. Typically, I'll create a second map of a floodplain, keep it in my pocket, and when somebody asks, I'll send it to them. I rarely put, yeah, the whole property's under the floodplain and put that on the internet too for everybody. So you can do that. Of course, this thing has got soils and those types.
When you list land, there's, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a separate kind of a land type of disclosure,
So
right? Or do
Yes.
you have to do-
Yeah, there's
So-
a vacant land disclosure.
there is a vacant land disclosure. I typically don't do them. Because if it truly is raw, let's say it's just 15 acres of woods and there's absolutely nothing on it. There's nothing to talk about. It's
Yeah.
woods, this is what it is. I would typically only do that or ask my client to do one was, let's say there was an old abandoned house on it that fell down 20 years ago and there's an old well out back. Or there's a couple of barns and or improvements that might need to be talked about, something that would be basically worth disclosing. Otherwise, if it's something that I can just basically tell them, I'm not worried about it. But yes, that is a separate form. It is optional. Most of the time I do not do it, but every now and then in the situation for the right piece of property, I will. As far as paperwork goes, there's absolutely nothing. I think, is it Murray Callaway that has a land contract separate than the residential? One of the boards does.
I think.
It might be Paducah.
ours.
I don't know if it's Murray Callaway or it's Paducah. Kentucky Barkley does not have one. So I just use, typically on land, I just use the Kentucky Barkley because it's shorter than the statewide. It's a lot easier. And really on land, you should be doing your due diligence ahead of time, most of the time. Unless the only thing in there, so, minus financing or a survey, which can be covered in that contract. Or any other additional things you want to write in the little box at the end. There's no other paperwork out there that is specific to land or does any help more. I mean, I kind of wish there was, but there's not. So besides the vacant land disclosure, which is optional, there's nothing necessary or required to sell land in any way, other shape or form than a house in that way.
I've only sold one piece of land and it was almost 3 acres, but I have a question just in case I did something wrong. The real estate agent wanted it, said that they needed it surveyed beforehand, but it had already been surveyed and I gave her the survey, but she said she wanted the corners marked. So I just went out there with T-posts and I found the little metal pins and then I hammered them in the T-posts in the ground, spray painted the top, put a flag where all the metal pins were, and I just called it a day. Was that okay?
You're going to jail.
Yeah, legally, if they found out, you could be in trouble. But
But I didn't move the metal pins.
there was I asked James about that because marking corners, finding existing pins, it's not rocket science. Anybody can do it.
Right.
There was a guy, I asked him one time, I said, why would nobody just do that? Why would you not make a business? You're not surveying.
Right.
And he said that a guy tried it and then they took him down in some form or fashion. And I don't know, because he was basically doing surveying by their definition without having a license. So similar to selling real estate, I guess, they got mad at him for doing that.
So
So,
then,
But it's not like you were charging anybody money. for
right,
it.
but I
right,
guess.
now he was charging people money,
Yeah,
so.
that's probably where the difference.
But here's
That's
the
a good
question,
point.
I guess here's my question, when an agent asks for that. They want the corners marked, the corners are already marked. It's not,
Mhm.
Yeah,
she should walk out there and look at the corners.
That's
know.
where I tell them to do their job,
Right, well.
unless I
she
really
was-
want to sell the property and be done with it or something, because
I really.
if we
just
know where,
wanted-
right, and that's it, if you know where they are and it's not hard, it's a nice gesture. But
And I
it's
didn't
no
know
big deal.
because I am very kind of new at all this. so
Well,
I
like
kinda
I said, you
wanted
didn't
to-
charge your money, so you didn't really do anything. That guy was charging money, so I guess that's the
Yeah.
thing.
Okay,
Uh,
well, I won't do that again, but I felt really bad after I did it, cause I was like, well, I told her the corners were marked.
Well,
And
that's
they
it.
are marked.
The other thing
but
is if
she
you
didn't
tell
wanna
them-
look for 'em,
So
I
if you
just
tell them,
marked
I'm going to
bigger.
go mark the corners for you. And they are aware of that. It's like selling a piece of property and telling them, like, I own this. I bought some agent. I know that, but I'm gonna do this for you. And like,
Yeah,
as long as it's
I mean, I even
disclosed,
took pictures of them. Here's this corner.
yeah.
I put the
But
pin,
that's-
here's this.
That's where I don't feel bad. If it's a lazy agent, then they can either, somebody needs to do that homework, do that job. I'm not, I mean, go figure it out. I am way too busy to deal with that. You know, that's your job, it's your buyer. You do your due diligence on that side of things, just like I would do if it's not, if it's my buyer, whatever. But that is how I have very much become over the last 2 or 3 years, especially as dealing, especially with not good agents. I'll put it that nice, put it that way.
Very nice agent.
So, you know, I will use this a lot of times. The only other site that I showed in the other class, and I haven't, this is new to me, I haven't got to play around with it just too terribly much, is acres.co. They are trying, acre value is another one. They're trying to come up with basically comps for land. There's a lot more, there's more tools in here also. There's also, there's more tools than this here also, but they are trying to come up with a record of comps and put them in, and that's what this company's doing. They're still in the very early stages. They also offer some other tools, like this is free. I'm not paying for this. I just have a login. But, you know, they are offering some information and other stuff that you can, acres.co. And I listened to a podcast with the guy who runs this not too terribly long ago. And they definitely have some really cool stuff coming, by the sounds of it. I was gonna, one thing that you can do, so this is my house. I showed this to the last one. If you want to know more about a specific property, what you can do on this, they have mapping software from, I forget who it's from, USGS or somebody, that where they can go back and you can see the historical imagery. No, it's not letting me. But like, if you wanted to see what was planted in this year, what was planted, or, you know, when was it the timber harvested? There's historical imagery on this website, and I don't pay for anything here. I haven't gotten quite that far, but here, we'll just do this one. This is not mine. It's neighbor. It's actually Debbie of all people. But you can go historical imagery, and so we could go back on that piece of property to 2010, say, and then you might see is one of those buildings there that wasn't there. There's actually, I don't know if you can see it.
so it just pulls up like old Google satellite images.
Yes,
Pretty
yes,
sweet.
and I don't know if
Cool.
this one doesn't. I don't know if this one technically comes from Google, but
Sure.
I think a lot of it was FSA or USDA. I don't know. But you can maybe, you know, so if there's a relevant point, you could see when it was cleared, when it was logged, when it was, so there's some land software and some land companies that are coming around that are trying to do some things similar to the MLS and catch up to the rest of the world, and make that market more efficient than it is. You know, comps is a huge one, a huge part of that. So it's hard to, you know, find those now, but those two websites are a couple of ones that I think are pretty good. And I showed both of those in the last one. But I mean, there's other things, like there's a sold land tab. I have no idea. I can't, it's so small in here. I can't even tell what I'm picking up on. So they paid 84 in 2017. So, and that's free. So that's kind of handy. If I click on this one, it won't let me. So those are a couple of just tools that I use on, so like it says on private sales or curated, you have to upgrade, which I haven't done. And then they're actually linking listings on here too, even though that whole thing is a whole nother deal. I will more things I can think about. Most land buyers are going to end up on Land Watch, Land and Farm, Lands of America. Those are the three big ones. It's the land.com bubble. It's like Zillow. It's all owned by the same company. And to get your listings showcased on there as one of the top, like they do it by Premier, which Whitetail has a network deal with them. So all of their agents come up first, unless somebody else basically, there are some other ones where you can pay more, but basically to be ranked on their website, because, and specifically for land, and then all of our MLS ones end up at the very bottom. And they have signature listings, and then they have premier listings, and then they have standard. We fall under the standard. So we don't get any extra advertising from them, but that's where 99% of buyers go for land, is essentially the land.com bubble of websites. And it's very hard and very expensive to get your stuff on there, because I tried it and paid for it for a while and this, that, and the other. And I finally, luckily the market was strong enough, I didn't really have to try too hard to get it out there. Of course, I do social media. You can advertise there, put them in whatever land hunting groups you want to. I post a lot of my hunting farms in Alabama deer hunting groups and Tennessee deer hunting groups and Arkansas deer hunting groups. I get kicked out occasionally, but I will just share them in those places. But that's where you'll get a lot of inquiries of buyers. If you enter it, I have seen absolutely no difference in entering it as a farm and or residential and or lots of land on our MLS. I don't think you gain anything from what I understand and have tried. I typically just enter them on lots and lands, because then it ends up on the residential websites also. At least I feel comfortable in that. Commercial does not feed the same way, which I have a problem with, but that's a whole other conversation. So that's just something there. But I do, I will have buyers that will find me on social media of all places, but I post about hunting and a lot, and have people that watch my stuff there. And then every once in a while I'll throw in a farm or something worth looking at. But that's just some of the stuff I do to be different and focus on that. And then that's kind of what I got on that. If there's anything else in specific I can answer for you guys, or any other topics I can talk about, or if you're ready to go.
Just one point of clarification, that price per acre on cash rent, is that a monthly or a seasonal?
That's a once a year payment.
Once a year.
So if it's at 125 times 10 acres, you're getting $450 a year. So, and that same thing goes on deer hunting. So if it's $15 to $20 an acre, that's once a year. So if the guys at the farm, that's why a farmer always wins. Unfortunately, it's like, I've had my own run-ins, but it's like, if they're paying that, we're paying this, who gets preference from the landowner?
Oh, I was gonna ask you something on this CRP stuff. If somebody was interested in that, is there a minimum number of acres that they have to purchase in order for it to be a CRP?
As long as it has a crop, so it has a crop history, one, and then two, what they will do, especially in WRP, and I think CRP the same way, they have X amount of dollars per year to spend on the program. They will take all applications for X amount of 2 months. There's a window you can apply. Each property receives a ranking and a number based off of how much it meets your criteria. They start at the top and they go till they run out of money.
Okay.
Once they run out of money, everything else can be, you can apply again next year. You can try again the next year. But they go, now I know that that's how WRP works. CRP is typically more flexible, but CRP is paying less now than it was back 10, 20 years ago, when that last farm, and CRP is commonly a 10-year contract. Sometimes it's a 5-year contract, most commonly 10. And we sold out, another thought on that is we sold a property that was on year 4 of 10. Well, to get out of that, you had to pay them back 4 years worth of payments. And that was going to be a fairly large sum of money.
So they're paying you not to grow anything. but to keep the land in good shape.
Right.
And it's a 10-year minimum commitment or 5 years.
Not 100% on the years. Standard, I think, is 10. It's changing with every farm bill that comes out. But yeah, that is essentially what they're doing. You're not getting usually as much as you would on cash rent. It might be $75 an acre. But for some people, it's worth it because then it's better hunting.
Right. So I have a client who has got some property that they live on, and I think they hunt on as well, but they have some kind of a thing where they plant like native
Mhm.
plants or something.
Like native worm seed and grasses. Or
Yeah,
trees.
yeah. I think that's what it is, but anyway, they have to plant this certain
Mm-hmm.
stuff to attract animals or whatever, and the government pays them. Do you know what that is?
Probably.
Probably
It's a
do.
portion of CRP. So there are variations. There are other programs like Prep and Step, which are cost share programs. So if you said, hey, I want to do this for deer on my property, wildlife on my property, they will cost share the initial startup costs, give you some money to do it. First, so it's not such an out of pocket expense, so that it does benefit the, landscape, wildlife, whatnot. But the rest of the maintenance and the rest of it's on you, and you have certain criteria to do. But they will initially fit the bill, but you don't get residual income from that.
It's like native grasses or whatever it was called.
Yeah, we have one farm that we've hunted for 10 years that's in that. It's awesome stuff. And I've done quite a few prescribed burns. It's fun to watch that stuff go when you light a match to it, and it,
And then I have another client, as crazy as this sounds, they're doing the same thing, but I don't know, it's not really native grasses. The government paid them and helped them to create a butterfly sanctuary. I was like,
there's
this
literally,
is insane.
there's all kinds of programs out there that exist. I mean, there are literally everything from salamanders to lots of different types of mitigation. I mean, which is basically, there are nonprofits and companies out there that, when they destroy a wetland, some big contracting company did, they have to replace it at a 2-to-1 rate. So if they take down an acre of wetland, you got to put it back at 2. So they don't do it. They just give the cost the cost of 2 acres to somebody else, and they do it. So there's lots of different entities out there that do that kind of things and get tax benefits for it. And I know a guy who does that, and then he does it for other points of conservation, but then he gets the deer hunter.
I was at their house and
I have 30 deer that run through my front yard all the time. If the government would like to pay me for that, I'll grow whatever grass they would like.
you know their names, whose names.
The deer,
Yeah.
no, but I'll tell you what, I have 3 nice looking